My wife thinks I'm crazy. She's like, I have these 3 monitors, and she's like, "You're always talking to, like, your computers all the time, telling it to do things for you." Create a event card for a Taylor Swift concert that's almost sold out. So you'll get this kind of layout. So it knows it's the Eras Tour, nails the composition. So if you're AI curious and you have, like, a heightened sense of creativity, like, you know what it is that you want to get out of it, and you have the vision for what the output should look like, you need to be able to get the reps in to understand what's the right way to feed the AI what the AI needs to know in order to get the results that you're expecting. To me, it always boils down to context. The majority of design systems practitioners and people who post about design systems mainly focus on the design to development gap. And I feel like in my world, we figured that out. We have really good tight workflows where we feel 99.9% about how that works. So I think the other gap that gets more ignored, that doesn't have as much tooling around it, is like the component to product engineering gap. And it's the unsexy gap. It's the gap that no
Mm.
one talks about. There's
So you're talking about adoption, right?
adoption and proper adherence to it, and also ensuring alignment.
Where does Figma fit into this whole workflow?
We want to empower designers to lean more into the product development side of things because they're always curious. The barrier to creating the vision that they have has never been so low.
Hey folks, this is Arseni, and I'm excited to bring you the fresh episode of Product Craft. I'm joined by TJ Pitre, founder of Southleft, an agency focused on design systems and modern front-end workflows. TJ has been in this space for over 15 years, and chances are you've seen one of his amazing LinkedIn posts where he shares about open source projects such as Figma Console MCP, Design System Assistant, Figma Lint, and others. TJ and his team are helping companies figure out how AI actually fits into real product development. We cover a lot of ground in this one and talk about the common challenges with AI adoption and what it actually takes to get your design system ready to benefit from AI. We also get into what TJ refers to as the unsexy gap, the part between coded components and actual adoption within a product. As always, I really appreciate your comments, shares, and subscriptions to the channel. Without a further ado, enjoy. When we spoke during the intro call, I think you mentioned that you have illustration background. What kind of illustration were you working on?
So the illustration thing, the goal for myself was to end up being a comic book artist. That was like the
Mm.
the the end all be all of my career. Like this was the where like I would be happy for the rest of my life if I had a drafting table with like a light hanging over it, and I'm just like I have all my materials out and my gum eraser and my blue pencil and my Bristol board, and I was creating all these beautiful scenes, and that was a moment where it felt like I was at complete peace. But then that was an industry that I learned really quickly that it's a little cutthroat. And then if I think this industry is stressful, I can imagine the stress of like that industry being 10 times worse. And it's the same thing in this industry where it's a lot of contract work. At the age that I was at of like 19 or 20, that I wasn't ready to enter into. I think I needed more stability. So anyway, I got rejected like a couple of times from some Comic Cons and just mailing in my portfolios. So then that illustration skill or hobby transitioned into graphic design. And then I started to do these like I still do these for fun because they're great. These vector portraits. So this was before like the Apple Pencil came out or iPads for that matter. This is just Illustrator or freehand and like mouse clicking and putting together like these like layered portraits of people. And they were awesome. And I just had a lot of fun doing that. And those are commissioned too. Like I would do commissions of, again, people's animals. That seemed to be a thing that people really liked. And I did one of my wife. I did one of Martha Stewart when I started working for her. When my firstborn child was born, I did like 10, like a whole series of him at various ages. And I still do it as like a fun thing to do.
And so, how did you transition into coding? Like right now, you run Southleft Agency, and which is the agency focused on front end development, if I understand correctly. And right now, you're very big into design systems, kind of helping companies to sort of modernize and figure out how to make sense of the whole AI thing and make sure that their design system can take advantage of that. Like, but how did you get into coding? Like, what attracted you to that?
Yeah, so a great segue from the illustration freehand. So freehand was part of the Macromedia suite, which was
Hmm.
back in the day, it was Dreamweaver, Fireworks, Freehand, and Flash. So I got into graphic design, and this is while I was in college. And they were graphic design classes that I could take that would like basically teach you Photoshop and like some like art layout type things. And some of the homework that I had from that class, I remember it was like creating CD covers, creating magazine covers. We used Quark back then, and then eventually used Adobe InDesign. So just getting familiar with all of those types of tools. And then there was a stationary package freelance design that I was asked to do for a local tile distributing company called Stafford Tile and Stone. I made their
Hmm.
logo and their envelope and their stationery, like the whole letterhead, like business cards, all the things. And she loved it. And then she said, "Can you make me a website?" And without hesitation, I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, duh. So of course I can make a
Yeah.
website." And I had no idea how to make a website. This is the story of my life, by the way. Like, yeah, of course I could do it, and then figuring it out along the way. And then so I jumped, 2 icons over in my dock from freehand into Fireworks, and then the graphic design skills transition nicely into UI design skills
Hmm.
and I thought it gave me a little bit of an advantage because I didn't approach websites the way websites were typically built. I was approaching them from like, well, this is the way I would wanna see it and use it without looking at like back then like Netscape and IE6 was probably the browser of choice, and there
Hmm.
was still some patterns to way like certain websites were being built back then. And I was just looking for like, okay, I need to match something that matches her brand, and her brand was all this like understated elegance and like the type of tile that she sold with these like Walker Zanger. I remember was like one of their big tile distributors, and it was all like really postmodern, contemporary, like really high end stuff. So I needed a website that reflected that. So I ended up carving out and designing it all in Fireworks. And then I remember I left like a slice in the middle where I wanted to have this like really cool like crossfade transition of all these beautiful interiors that were built with these tiles. And I didn't know how to do it with JavaScript just yet, but I had Flash, and
Hmm.
Flash had like embeddable Swift files after you built the FLA file. And I just remember importing these images that she had sent me, and then I was using just like the tween part at the timeline keyframes to tween it. And then I started dabbling with it more, and I was noticing that like I had finer control over it when I was using ActionScript, which is just like the little
Hmm.
console that would open at the bottom. And that was probably like the gateway drug into getting into
Hmm.
development. ActionScript translated almost directly, at least ActionScript 3 back then translated almost directly to JavaScript. Like the syntax was super similar, and it was like I'm moving a shape from one side to another side of the canvas, and I'm shrinking it or doing or whatever it is. And I learned about easing equations that were beyond just like linear ease in, ease out, ease in, out. Like
Hmm.
there was like these quint in, out, scene in, out, and that was really neat. And so just from doing the firework stuff and exporting that as HTML and trying to get a good understanding of, back then it was all tables that I was exporting, and then coupling that with Flash, that was what embarked on my web design and development path. So
Hmm.
that was when like I decided, all right, I'm done with graphic design. That's going to stay as a hobby. I'll still like help out friends and family members with birthday cards and poster gigs and gig posters and other things, which I still do, and I think it's fun. I like to stay up on all of those toolings. Like it's neat seeing what even Photoshop and Illustrator are doing now with AI, and so I occasionally edit people's photos to do funny things in it using a lot of those tools, but not as a profession. Yeah, so that was like the jumping off point to web design in general. Front end
Yeah.
development ended up taking up on its own path, but that was like the entryway into being in the world of web.
That's awesome. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I remember those days. Like I started also like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And yeah, like I remember those days of like opening source, view source of HTML, like figuring out how the hell is it built, taking pieces, bits and that. I was also using Flash. I did a bit of JavaScript, but I kind of, for whatever reason, I could not, like my mind was not working in that way for whatever reason. And so that's kind of when I realized that, like I'm way more into the actual design. And then I transitioned more into the product design side, into the UX, and sort of was working tightly with engineers like who actually were deep into that, which is interesting to think about kind of how where we are today. Like we've definitely come along the way from those days. And like with the advent of AI right now, I'm now back into this like tinkering and coding. And it's like, I feel like, okay, even though I don't know exactly how to write things on my own, I understand more or less, how products are built. And it's just like an incredibly empowering time when you can sort of jump back in or even start if you've never done it. And so, like, I think a big portion of what we're going to talk about today is going to focus on AI design systems, which is your wheelhouse. And I wanted to ask you, where, like, where do you feel we are at this point in time? It's what, late March, 2026, right? What is the state of AI at the moment, in your opinion, when it comes to product development? Because on one hand, everybody hears about it, everybody understands that, like, awesome, you can use AI to build products. But like, what is that level of adoption that people are using it day to day that you see? Like,
Yeah.
is it actually became like a staple or still kind of part of the just the conversation and something that
Yeah.
people want to do but not quite doing yet?
Let me see if I can try to compartmentalize this answer because it's across the board. It's all the way from like zero adoption or like adoption avoidance to extreme adoption and like there's no turning back to any traditional methods of any way that we used to do things before, and then everything in between. The the organizations that we work with, I would say the majority of them are all AI curious still, but
Hmm.
still haven't found, they're somewhere between AI curious and accepting of AI and adopting AI, and have found and implemented bits and pieces of where they can insert AI to actively be supportive and effective to help optimize traditional workflows. And this isn't just within design systems. This is like for like we've seen it with like agency operations and project management and just like financial operations, but also including design systems. A lot of teams of what we see, a lot of organizations that we work with haven't quite figured it out, but they're AI curious. And what they've done is like spun up AI teams. And it's almost like these AI teams are the ones whose responsibility it is to figure it out. And I don't know how long it would take for them to figure it out, but it's just they're the organization within the in-house, like they're like a skunk project of some sort that
Hmm.
might just be a ragtag group of AI enthusiasts who know the most about AI just from it being a hobby of theirs. And their job is to like measure workflows and then measure efficiencies and calculate risk of AI output and like all of the stuff that goes into kind of this like mad scientist phase, throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks and then documenting that and then trying it out and then seeing if it passes or fails. And then getting to a point to where, all right, we've ran enough reports and analysis on like this is the output of it. We feel safe talking to the teams and then like figuring out ways that we could maneuver some of these findings into actual traditional workflows. Those two are probably the most things that we see. On the other ends of the spectrum is the ones that have just gone all in. And
Hmm.
I don't want to name any specific names, but there's a lot of larger organizations out there that you've
Yeah.
that you've.
Shopify.
I was saying that there's one of the largest e-commerce platforms out there is just they're like we're just all AI, and that's great. And like they're the ones on the extreme end of the spectrum who are early adopters and are just kicking butt. They're doing
Yeah.
great over there, and we were early adopters of AI as an agency. In January, I wrote this long blog post about how we're doing everything AI first because we're true believers in AI. We do understand that there are impacts of AI, but we also wanted to be transparent about how we use AI within organizations, and we want to be transparent with the organizations that we work to let them know that we are using AI, but don't expect us to be vibe coding your whole project or anything.
Hmm.
We in the early engagement with AI in these projects or even before the projects, it's almost like getting a second opinion. Like it just doesn't hurt to bounce ideas and workshop and brainstorm with AI. It might give you a new outlook on a lot of these things. But even before we were like AI first, everybody was using like Copilot. Because before
Hmm.
Copilot became Microsoft's thing, Copilot was like an extension to VS Code that was from GitHub that we would use to enhance the efficiencies of our functions that we're writing. And it was great, but none of us thought of it as like, okay, this is gonna revolutionize the way we write code. So where is like Shopify is on one end of the spectrum, there's other organizations that are on the other end of the spectrum that are not necessarily AI verse. They're still curious, but there's like lots of red tape and blockers in the way. There's a lot of organizations that are really sensitive, and rightfully so, given like these types of organizations about security. So I think it's just that even though it feels like AI has been around for a while, it also feels like it's only been around for a second. Just
Yeah.
because like the evolution, the advancements of
Yeah.
AI over the past of what's, going over 2 years now, I would say it's been pretty mainstream. But it's difficult for these IT groups to be able to vet all of these new products that are coming out from a security standpoint, especially because it takes a while to understand whether or not this is going to be any kind of impact on their internal systems, how to roll it out effectively for teams, and how to like keep control on the prompts that the team members are prompting and where is it going. And so like, all of that are things that are key considerations that are high risk factors for these departments to consider before adopting AI. So I do see that a lot in these organizations, which goes back to that reason why sometimes these organizations will spin up those like, here's your little annex. This is like your AI working group. And then
Hmm.
IT, instead of deploying it company wide, will deploy to this little incubator, this little sandbox group where they're allowed to like do the things with it and then report back. Then the IT group can run reports not on every product that comes out or every advancement in AI, but just what's worked from this small team.
Do you ever see that these clients in this category who are kind of like AI curious, as you define them, would have maybe heightened expectations around what AI can bring to them? And then, like, through discussions, there is a realization of, like, well, actually, it's not quite possible. Maybe our system and the way that our code is written is actually not suitable for that. Like, where is that if you were to create some sort of, I don't know, Venn diagram of
Yeah.
like the expectation versus reality of what's possible and what are the common blockers for them to actually take advantage of that?
I think a lot of that comes down to personality, and they are people who are just inherently opposed to AI, and there are people who are just genuinely AI curious. The people who are like slightly opposed or question AI are usually the quickest to judge the output of AI and then make a definitive opinion on it right there. So if they are working with a generative image AI or if they're working with a generative code AI like Claude Code or something, and they enter a prompt and then what the output is doesn't meet the expectations, then a lot of times they'll write it off. And then you'll see them post something about it on Twitter or LinkedIn or something like, this new tool that everybody's, in the hype cycle talking about actually doesn't live up to the expectations. You always see the bifurcation between it happened like when Figma launched the bidirectional nature of having agents write to Figma. Like there was like almost a 50-50 split between the feedback that you can go on whatever social media outlet and see people going, "Oh, this is what it generated for me." this isn't ready for prime time yet. Or, oh my God, look what it did for my variables table. And look how it was able to adjust this component set to add these new variations and states. And then look what it did to like run diagnostics. So it's a split. But then there's like the AI curious people who I think are just more open minded when it comes to the output. And I talk a lot about getting your reps in because when I don't, everybody remembers when AI first came out, the big thing that people were writing books on was like prompt engineering. It's
Hmm.
like how well can you prompt to like make sure that the response that you're getting for AI was the right response and it wasn't going to hallucinate or start going off in a different direction. That rule still applies, although we might call it context engineering now, depending on what your background is. But getting your reps in is that. It's like, so if you're AI curious and you have like a heightened sense of creativity, like you know what it is that you want to get out of it, and you have the vision for what the output should look like, you need to be able to get the reps in to understand what's the right way to feed the AI what the AI needs to know in order to get the results that you're expecting. That can come through multiple ways. That can come through like creative prompting. It could come through using tools like MCPs. It can come through using skills or custom subagents or subagents from off the shelf that are provided by communities. It could come from hooking it up to something locally, like if you're using Cowork or Claude Code to like reference another code base that I have that's a sibling directory to this. So it always boils down to context, and context is the method for design systems that we've employed through a lot of reps and trial and error, and we call it context based design systems because as we're not coining a term, it is what it is. It's this cascade
Yeah.
of context that leads down to the product engineering phase to eventually help with a higher fidelity output with using supportive AI in the mix.
I'm curious if you agree, like, on one hand, there is probably a set of use cases for AI that are like already very stable and reliable. And then there is a category of more of like experimental stuff. Like this is like looks very cool, has high potential, but still maybe a little bit raw for like actual daily use. What are some of I'm curious like to get almost examples of maybe first a couple of stable use cases that are like these are legitimately stable things that everybody who spends enough time and configures things properly will be able to benefit from like today. It's already working, and like if you're not doing it, you're actually missing out. Like what would you say are like top, I don't know, two, three, one, whatever amount?
Yeah. So I think it depends on what type of output you're looking for. So we mainly work in the world of design systems and
Hmm.
code integrity and design fidelity. And most of the design fidelity we're looking for is from a design engineering perspective. So when we're creating designs or inspecting already like designs that have already been created in a design platform like Figma, then we're looking for proper metadata and we're looking for like proper design spec. We're looking for best practices when it comes to creating common foundational components. So that's all things that are necessary for us. So the tooling that we use that works best for us is obviously Claude Code, like Claude Code, and specifically for the analytics and diagnostics part, it's going to be Opus. At the time of this recording, it's Opus 4.6. We like to use the extended thinking model for a lot of the initial upfront like knowledge based research piece because I like to do a full extended analysis on either the design side, the component set, or whatever it is I'm running the diagnostics on, or on the code side. So like run a complete analysis on the integrity of this code. And then that way it stores all that stuff to memory. So that way any subsequent requests that come after that, then it could run them faster. You're going to get a lot of
Hmm.
token spend in that first upfront cost, but then everything that happens after that, it could run from memory and it doesn't have to do all these like repeated like searches because that usually is when it's like digging around, searching through things, referencing things where you see those token values go up. But as far as like tools and things that work along with this, we stack a lot of things. So if we say like the Claude Code with the Opus is the best for diagnostics and reporting, and then also we'll use it for like design creation and code creation. But sometimes like lowering it to Sonnet is a good one too. So if it's like easy task updates, like batch variable updates on the Figma side, Sonnet 4.6 is great for that kind of stuff. It's your workhorse. It's gonna churn through. It's gonna measure everything. So like you can switch in the mode. So you can go 4.6 to get the diagnostics, and then you're like, all right, well, I need to create a new variable mode that's based off of muted properties or dimmed properties that are like. So I needed to calculate dimmed from dark in the variable mode for the theme, dark mode theme, and then it'll do that for you. And Sonnet is great for that. Now, the tool stack that happens with that, that allows us to be able to get the fidelity, and this is the cheat code that I'll just put out there, is one, we use our design systems assistant. This is an MCP that we created that's full of like thousands of resources that are filled with design systems best practices. So when
Hmm.
we ask it to run that diagnostics, we'll say, run this diagnostics, but not based on just general knowledge, Opus 4.6, Claude understanding what it's been trained on. We say, run it through the lens of the design systems assistant MCP. That way, if we're saying, run an analysis on this GitHub Primer button component and then let us know what we need to update. Is it AI ready? It's going to run through like Materials, Polaris, Spectrum, Fluent, all the big ones up there. Find the pattern recognition between all of the ones that they have for their types of buttons. It's going to go through a whole accessibility and UX property, because there's a lot of like Nielsen Group resources within Design Systems Assistant. Like, what are the best practices for these types of components? And then give you a report back and say, okay, this is what's good. This is what's not good. This is what should be updated. And then when
Hmm.
we get to the point to where we need to update some things, then we do some other critical analysis. We use something called sequential thinking, which is like what helps with making decisions about whether or not this might be, because a lot of times you're going to get back the full kitchen sink. And then really all you need, because of the component, because of the application that these components are going to be supporting, isn't that. Maybe I don't
Hmm.
need the option of having an icon on the right or the left of a button. Maybe I just need the button. So
Yeah.
we'll run it through like the sequential thinking MCP. It gives us back an analysis of like, measures what the report was and says, from a like application standpoint, this is actually what you should probably leverage
So
from
it's
there.
almost like ranking of like the prioritization of the initial output. And is it part of which part of which tool is that? Is it part of
It's a
Design
custom tool.
Assistant?
In
It's a
sequence, it
separate
would be,
tool.
yeah. It's called sequential thinking. You could if there's a resources section to this
Hmm.
podcast, I can give you the link to it. Sequential thinking is the one that we'll use to like help us make these like human centered decisions. And then when we get to the point to where we actually want to start executing on code, we use one called Serena. So Serena is for semantic code retrieval and editing tools. It helps a lot with understanding best practices in how things should be coded. And then we use Context 7, because a lot of the work that we do usually need Context 7 is an MCP that basically has all of the
It's like documentation, right?
documentation. And so a lot of times we work with the Figma API. We work with like, if we're using Shad CN has an API. If we're on the product engineering side, then something like Supabase, we use all the documentation. That Supabase actually has its own MCP too. But all of these, we always like to just have a glance into what's in Context 7. So that way, whatever general knowledge, whatever we fed the AI so far, like, let's just do one last round of checks to confirm that, all right, this is good, and we're ready to continue on with whatever the next step is.
And sequential thinking is a tool that South created, or
Yeah,
it's
it's out
a
there in the public. Yeah, I want to say it's open source. There's somebody behind it. I forget what
okay, got
organization is
it.
behind it, but yeah,
And
yep.
Serena is another. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I'll
awesome.
throw, and then just last one I throw in there, the Playwright CLI. Playwright's
Hmm.
Microsoft, but it's open source, and you can just go to their repository. I use the Playwright CLI. There's the MCP available too, but we mainly use the CLI. So when you go throughout the whole course of, let's say you're moving from we just created the component in the Figma source. Now we want to transition that. We use the Figma console MCP to transition the design into the coding environment. We have specialized tools inside the Figma console MCP to ensure accessibility and proper coding standards and all that stuff. But then when you get to the end of the line, you want to enter into like a feedback loop, like a little flywheel of, okay, I just developed a component. the Figma console MCP takes screenshots of the Figma component and then passes it to the Playwright CLI for the CLI to run in the browser to then take screenshots of what it looks like in the browser to compare those two screenshots. And then the Figma console MCP, paired with the general knowledge AI, if it's in this case Claude, keeps iterating over we're usually doing it in the storybook environment, keeps iterating over the tool until it's identical. And so we just sit back and watch we use Warp. I use Warp for my code editor, just watching them talk to each other. Like it's like having a conversation between them. It's like, no, that doesn't look like it. Looks like, we're using a different token for that, or we need to scoot that 2 pixels to the left. But it's great.
That workflow, yeah, this is also part of Figma console MCP, right? Like this kind of check between browser output and what's in the design system. Is there a name of the tool that you need to invoke to use that?
It by telling it what you want to do, it automatically invokes the
I
sequence of
see.
tool sets. Yeah. Even we have one called like advanced component or like advanced component deep development or something, where we have component development tool and then we have component deep development. And sometimes when you're asking it to develop a component that has a lot of like composition and nested structures to it, this is kind of an irresponsible way of developing a component that's been designed, because normally what we like to do is kind of take like the Russian doll approach to creating components. You like to have the little components first, like an icon or avatar, because we know that's going to be widely used amongst other components. Then we'll branch out into components that have compose structure. So we might do like a button because that can contain an icon. And then we're like, all right, well, maybe we should do a card component. Now, card components these days are mostly slots, but let's say like maybe the button is part of that, or we'll do like a banner or an alert that has dismissible options, or maybe it has calls to actions or something in it. So that way, since we already created the buttons or the button group, it knows that it already exists. So it'll just pull those in there. If you want it to go full throttle and without creating any of those other nested component structures, then you do the deep component development tool. And then what it does is this like, it has a depth of, if I want to say 10, where it'll dig up to 10 nested components. So if you want to do something like a data table or a date range time picker. So date range time pickers have list items, they have calendars, they have form fields, input fields, buttons. So it'll do an analysis on all of those buttons, of all of those fields, those components. It'll look out in your component library what exists and what doesn't. It'll create the primitive components that are needed in order to make up the total composition of all of it, and then put together the outer piece of it, which is like the part that's mainly just all of the nested pieces that it just created. But it's a cool.
That's also
Actually, I just posted on a demo on that today, just doing it with an Accord.
Yeah, I saw the post. I need to watch it more thoroughly. But yeah, like you post, you're very active on LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing, by the way, all the knowledge. You're like trailblazing, sharing with the community.
Loved
That's
it.
amazing.
It's great. It's like it's the best place for engagement. Like it's hard to get traction, and like I think since the other social media has bifurcated in so many different directions, like with Threads and Blue Sky and Mastodon and X and whatever, it's like that. It's too many to keep track of. I'll still post on those, but I think Substack is probably my main go-to in LinkedIn, because
Mhm.
Substack I can do longer form things, and then LinkedIn for like instant engagement, and people can like jump on it right away and start using it right.
So, in your opinion, like if we think again about this kind of like end-to-end product development workflow, like in the context of kind of design system, but then not just design system that sort of lives in a vacuum, but actually being used for a product creation. Do you think we've covered sort of all of the steps already? Like when I say we've covered, meaning like the technology exists there to support those use cases, or are there still some gaps where still maybe things are a little bit shaky or maybe not even created yet? Like for example, it sounds like when it comes to reviewing existing code and analyzing the code and like creating variables and token definitions, suggestions for improvement, like everything basically documentation related seems pretty solid. I think it seems like creation of the components themselves, like whether you want to do it in code or back in Figma, seems to be working. What are some of the gaps still that you feel are
Okay, it's a great question. So, I'm glad you used the word gaps because it's like the majority of design systems practitioners and people who post about design systems mainly focus on the design to development gap. It's like that's the chasm, where it's like we need to bridge this gap effectively. And I feel like in my world we figured that out. I know a lot of people are still trying to figure it out. I feel like we've gotten a really good grasp on that, and we have really good tight workflows where we feel 99.9% sure about how that works. Some organizations have nuance that because of resourcing and because of team allocation, and the ratio of like product designers and developers are usually outweighed like 5 to 1. I think the other gap that gets more ignored that doesn't have as much tooling around it is like the component to product engineering gap. So it's like the design system reaches the end of its cycle. Your components are all created, and then there's like a number of pathways you can go from there. And a lot of it has to do with the organization that you're working with. Because like a typical path might end up being, well, let's build the components, let's publish them to a node package, let's pass them along to a product engineering team, and then let's trust that they're going to pull these components in and everything's going to be honky dory. And then when that component exists and is launched in the final product, the person who was on the beginning end of that spectrum, the product designer who conceived this button, can then play with the actual product, when it's launched and go, yes, that's the focus state color that we put in. That's the transition delay that I wanted on that scroll effect. But it still feels like and it's the unsexy gap. It's the gap that no one talks about. There's the
So you're talking about adoption, right? Like adoption of the design system to be used in product.
adoption and proper adherence to it, and also ensuring alignment. So it's like we have these tools that ensure alignment between what's been designed and then what comes out of development. Like we have this Figma lint tool that we built that ensures components and component sets are AI ready, that ensures that when developers inherit these components that they're actually have everything they need without a whole lot of communication that needs to happen. Not that we're trying to replace communication, we're just trying to help facilitate communication where it's needed. But when a lot of design systems teams, the design systems developers are really just responsible for creating like the dumb components, and then it's product engineers who will eventually import those components and then apply business logic to it and APIs and the part that actually makes it usable for the people who are going to be either purchasing the product or engaging with the product. But it's that part where it still feels like there's a blind spot in there. And in our line of work, it's the part where I feel like we have the least amount of visibility. Like we'll do work up front in the beginning of a engagement where we test the life cycle of a couple of components. We have a spreadsheet where it's like usually we'll take these like primitive components, and these are the ones that we usually start with until we get to like a composed structure. Let's say it's a form that we want to get to. So we've designed enough component elements, enough form field elements to put together a form. So we'll generate a form, and then so we'll package up all those form inputs, and then we'll pass it along we'll package it up in like a alpha package or some or tester package, and then we'll have product engineers pull that in, and then we'll work with them to like say, hey, does this work for you? And like, do we have the right endpoints put in here? Like, is this can you just nest this neatly into your already predefined infrastructure, and then have it just work? Usually, there's a little bit of back and forth that happens right there. But then once that's done, we might do a couple of more tests depending on how many products are actually going to be supported by the design system. And we'll test in each one of those products if they're ready to be tested. But there's also a moment when it's like, all right, bye.
Well, like now I need to do all this work to actually integrate all of these beautiful components. And like, is it the problem is it tooling or is it communication or just like sometimes laziness?
I think a lot of times it comes down to communication. I think most times it comes down to business decisions. I think it's deadlines, and I think it's revenue driving deadlines where we haven't perfected the product development lifecycle, where it's like the design systems team, like whether it's federated or dedicated, and they kind of live within that product development lifecycle. And I think when it goes outside of the walls of that team, then there's additional communication. So that's the other part of the gap. And then on the product engineering side, it's hard for them to go back to whoever the stakeholder was that they're responding to. So it's like either they can say, "Hey, person, I have this Jira ticket. I need to knock this out by the end of the week. But I'm noticing that like these tokens aren't lining up correctly. I can't get it to accommodate the layout that I need to match, the part of the product that it needs to fit within the component, the like new component or the component variant or whatever it is that needs to fit within the product. Question, do I take it upon myself to make it work by like using some XX props or inline styles or just like making this round peg fit into a square hole? Or do I take it back to the design systems manager or the person who's responsible for queuing up work on that side and say, all right, what we found is in this instance, we weren't able to make it work. Let's see if we can do some testing on our end to ensure that this works properly, and then send it back through the chain. Sometimes you don't have time for that, and this is why I say sometimes where the canonical source of truth is flexible. So what happened on that side was that a product engineer found out that there was some sort of flaw in the design system that wasn't caught in that design system workflow. So they had to make some improvements on that end in order to reach the deadline that was a revenue driving deadline to make sure that this thing can get rolled out because there's a marketing campaign built around it and everything. So there was a change that was made there. So now we need to like retrofit that change back into the design systems code. Now canonical source of truth is what was fixed. It's the right thing. It's the thing that was like that made it work. So now we have to employ that fix in the code. And this is where we use the design system. This is where we use the Figma console MCP parity tool, where it's like we'll make that change in the design systems code in the component structure. And we say canonical source of truth is the at this point it's the coded component. We need to adjust for that on the Figma side or whatever your design
Hmm.
platform side is. So then it'll run that analysis and say, this is what you need to do in Figma in order to make this work. Maybe it's like an auto layout adjustment or something like that. And then it'll give you two options. It'll say like, would you like me to add comments? Because it'll add Figma comments to the points where it needs to be adjusted with whatever actual adjustments need to be made in the properties panel. Or it'll say, you want me to just do it? And then it'll just fix it for you. So a lot of that depends on like how
Yeah.
much faith you have in the AI and how you adopt AI into your design. Like, 'cause there's a lot of the designers want awareness of what's going on. So if it just fixes it and it does things like you'll see it in the revisions table in Figma, like where it actually made the change because it makes the change the same way a manual change would be made. So you can like Apple Z out of it if you don't like it.
Yeah. What do you think? So I don't let me try to see if I can phrase it. Like most companies out there, most products out there already have existed as opposed to just being started yesterday. And so which means that there is technical debt, there is design debt, and basically companies are kind of like in the situation that they're in. And now they're thinking about like, okay, all of the AI stuff. It could, maybe can help me. Great. Like I'm curious. Like by all means, I want it to help me, but I also have all these pages in Figma and in production, and they don't match together. Um, uh, Half of my design system is not even built out. Like if you take this kind of like average example, I wonder like is it almost easier to sort of start some things from scratch at this point, given that we can code quite fast and like just like rebuild things, or does it still make sense to leverage a lot and like rebuild and evolve what already exists? Like I know it's a very broad question,
Yeah.
and it depends,
It's a very
but
it depends answer.
yeah.
If it's a suite of products, I mean, like we've been in this situation before where we've had to run an analysis on a product and see if we could align it, like realign it back with was more of like a UI kit on the Figma side. And our job was to understand if we can like extract components from the product and then
The code base, right?
from the code base and like create this middle layer. Like, how do we realign buttons that have gone months and drifted so far away from what the original intent was? And then so that the process of that realignment was just a lot of decision making. It's like, so, and this is where we kind of go back to that, like, what is the source of truth now? Users are used to seeing this. this product is or isn't successful. If it is successful, then maybe that decision is easy. Maybe it's like, okay, well, this is a very successful product the way it's been built, even though it's like 20% bifurcated from the original design. So in that instance, maybe we should need to update the design to match more of what has launched on the product side of things. There are instances where it's like there were some Figma comps. It's not even really a UI kit or anything. There's no there's no components, or if there is components, it's like the header and the footer. It's like because we reuse these pieces, and the rest of it's all just like made up stuff. And a lot of organizations don't make use of variables, or they'll make use of like local Figma styles. In those instances, it's like it's not like a slash and burn kind of thing. There's references that you can gather from pattern recognition in the comps that could be extracted to build some semblance of. And we've recently did this at the end of last year and the beginning of this year for a project where there was these like beautiful pictures of application screens, and there was a lot of consistency between like how all these were built, but the way it was built on the Figma side wasn't built to be a design system. It was built because there was some like really deep conceptual thought into what the feelings wanted, like they wanted like these vivid colors and a lot of contrast and everything. So you could tell the focus was like we had a mood board that we had put together, and then this was the translation from the mood board. We didn't go one step further and dissect that translation into componentized like design system pieces. They just went straight from that mood board to the concept templates and then right into an app. And then what ended up happening was that in that app, there was a lot of decisions that were being made that made the process of getting something, the end result was inconsistency from page to page or section to section. Like, I mean, within every aspect of the design, there was no token. So there was just like hard coded values for padding and all the different image ratios. And like, there was nothing for a common user. They might notice like differences here and there. But if you're someone who's in the design systems world, you're like, well, this is a little odd. This is an editor's picks on one page doesn't look the same as the editor's picks on the other page of this publication website. So what we did was we went back and then we started extracting a lot of these common patterns that we found, and then made a primitive foundations Figma
Mhm.
library out of it. So now we have foundational elements. And then the next step was, all right, so now we have enough there to create the recipes or like organisms or however you want to look at it. Because like if we're talking about these atomic design
Mhm.
principles, there's like organisms that are things that we would consider, compositions of
Cards,
components. Yeah, things like that
widgets.
that are contributable to the design system. So these are reusable modular pieces. But then there's like recipes, which are more like instances of these organisms, but are unique and one time only kind of
Flavors.
things. But yeah, like we all have different vernacular for these things, but that's more along the lines of like of kind of how it works. And those things we wouldn't bundle in a package for a design system. So to kind of battle test what we did there, we were trying to recreate some of these things like the editor's picks and the like top events of the day type. And we figured out a way to recreate these patterns. What we did was uh, the application itself was already using a off the shelf component library. It's the most popular one that's out there now. So under the hood, we already knew what came with that, and we were very accustomed with this component library because we use it on 100 different projects before. So we were able to match up and actually salvage a lot of the production application, and then there was maybe like 30% of it that was disposable, but the logic that powered those components were salvageable. Like all of the things that were like surfacing the top 10 picks and the editor's picks were all pieces that we just replaced the components with and weave them into our new recipes that we had tested through a Figma side of things and then into Storybook. Storybook was really the major test because now we knew that we can actually put together these components to do and build the thing that would be the instance or the representation of how it would be built on the product side.
So, couple of questions there. So, you mentioned that one of the first steps was to extract the components from the code base into Figma. First of all, is that what you can use Figma Console MCP for that extraction, or which tool would be applicable?
Figma Console MCPs is the design systems manager. So it tries to treat your design, it expects a design system or some semblance of a design system to be available for it to inspect. It treats your design system like an API, both from a code side and a design side. This is probably more of the manual part. This is where you have a well-skilled design engineer opening up the comps within your Figma project, and then manually identifying the parts that they know just from being a design systems practitioner for so long that would that would build what are the foundational elements. So it could just be a lot of dragging and dropping into like different, generate all your pages, copying all your things into your pages. Once you componentize each one of those things and give them a common best practices name, like you don't want to call a button like pressy thingy, like you want to call it like a button. At that point is when you can deploy something like Figma Console MCP, because then it starts to like understand. All right, these are elements. These are things that can actually be used and componentized into sets that have applied metadata like properties and states and variants and Boolean values. And at that point is when you can deploy the design systems assistant to say, okay, I've extracted these 32 components from the comps. Ignore the comps. Here's the 32 pages that I want you to review. You might want to do them in like batches of 5 or something, just so that way you don't overload your tokens. Because the AI does best when it's allowed to do deep thinking one at a time rather than just do like a quick pass over the top of everything, because you're not going to get the fidelity that you're looking for. I like the individualized attention and then like taking one at a time and moving on. So that's a great time to deploy the Figma Console MCP, because it'll do what, like I was saying earlier, it'll leverage that design systems assistant and then understand what the purpose of the end user application is, and then determine how it should build out that component set.
So just to make sure I got it, that first part when you were saying basically kind of like auditing existing product and moving the components over into Figma manually, you're talking about like literally maybe, I don't know, screenshotting the product, bringing in Figma and redesigning in Figma.
No, I'm under the assumption that it's in Figma already.
Okay, what if it's
Like we'll
not?
get handed,
What if there is like a huge discrepancy between
like if we're getting
the Figma
JPEGs or something.
no, like let's say, I mean, let's say, I don't know, maybe there are some, I don't know, primary button is in Figma, but like a bunch of things are not.
Then yeah, you could start screenshotting some stuff. I think that could work. It's stretching the abilities. I always tell people whenever they use Figma Console MCP, like the only limit is your creativity. But I've seen people do some wild stuff. So if you don't
I
have an
actually,
actual component from
yeah,
a comp that was created in Figma, you can serve it a reference from a different website and be like,
yeah.
I like this button. Create a component set based off of the properties of this button, and then run it that way.
I actually used like I installed Figma Console MCP a few days ago, and I played with it a bit. And I just for fun, like I have this project. It started completely in like in code in Cursor. I didn't even open Figma. But then I was like, okay, can I? If I have this code base, what can I do with this? Just as an experiment. And I did ask Figma Console MCP to create me components and screens in Figma based off of the code base. I mean, it took me a couple of prompts. Like it didn't do like a perfect job right away, but actually did a pretty good job, like right away with defining variables and things like that. I'm not sure if maybe there are some gaps that like I'm not seeing in terms of how things are built out. Maybe it's not, but like just on the surface level, it actually looked pretty impressive.
I mean, and goes back to the reps part. It's like it's a tool that you eventually have to get comfortable with. My first time using like a jigsaw, like a power
Hmm.
tool, I didn't know what I was doing with it. I was going all over the place. But
Yeah.
the more I practice with it, the more comfortable I get with it, the more exact I can predict like how to wield the blade. It's the same thing with these tools. I think you just kind of you find your groove. And then what I found that the more you work with it in a single session, the smarter it gets and the more predictive and the more intuitive it starts to understand what you're trying to do. So the less descriptive you have to be with it. Like it's going to know that if the first time it messed up because it didn't put your components in a set or it missed some, some variables that it accidentally did as hard coded like hex colors or something like that, it'll know next time you do it, it'll learn from that experience.
Yeah, I want to leave some time for the demos, but maybe before we go into that kind of big question that I've been thinking about, but I think also almost like a bunch of people are considering is like, where does Figma fit in into this whole workflow? How critical it is still, right? Because there has been traditionally this division: designers work in Figma, engineers work in code, then there is the handoff. Well, now designers, product managers, whoever more or less with enough time spent, with enough reps, can start to produce code. And it can result in things that look very much like products that can be then, I mean, with enough iterations spent, and if you know what you want, eventually you'll get there. And so, and there is almost like a question like, why do we need Figma, right? Like, and where does it fit? And I think that, I mean, I have my kind of thoughts on that, but I'm curious to hear your take.
So I get asked this a lot. I don't. My take is we don't try to make any like hard and fast recommendations or hot take predictions on topics like this. We try to do enough research to understand where it feels like the most effective use of either one tool or a combination of tools are, and where that usually lands is meeting the users or the teams where they are and where their skill sets and where their experience lies. Like I was having this conversation earlier and I was relating it to like the use of mixed media in art. There are people like if the means to an end is to create this beautiful landscape of mountainous Greenland area, a la Bob Ross picture or something, you could deploy many different methods to get there. You could mix oil paints with Sharpie markers and color pencils and get there, or you can just paint it in watercolor or acrylic. At the end of the day, it's still going to be a painting. One might consider it's ends up subjective at the end. It's going to be like whether or not this is I like this version better than this version, which is the same as UI and UX at the end of the day. I think Figma has its place. I think its place depends on the team that's using it. In like I was saying earlier about a lot of teams have a ratio imbalance where like most teams that we work with, it's usually less product designers than product engineers. So if the tool that product designers are most comfortable in that can help them perform their jobs at the highest level. If that's Figma, then Figma's great. Figma will always have a place. If the team is heavily lopsided, where there's like, one or two product designers and 100 engineers, then Figma probably won't end up being the source of truth in that case because it just won't. The designers won't be able to keep up with the
Yeah.
output that comes from the engineering side of things, which is why we have two things, which is why we have the Figma console MCP that has the code parity tool to make sure that whatever's happening on what will likely end up being the canonical side of truth and on the code side makes its way into Figma. So that way the product designers are always sketching and iterating over the right stuff and not like iterating over the wrong stuff for would be wasted cycles. But part of the context-based design system workflow is that we want to empower designers mainly because of this ratio and just because of the advancements in AI, because they can empower designers to lean more into the product development side of things. We like the idea of working with product designers because they're always curious. And now they have the barrier to creating the vision that they have has never been so low. So in a traditional Git flow model, it might be like, designers create the design and then they give it a visual review and say, oh, this looks good. Let's kick it over to development, approved. And then developers get it and they're like, well, it's missing some properties or whatever, but I'll fill in the rest. You already got a little bit of drift there that's happening. but I'm working in a development branch. I'm going to make a pull request against the master branch. It's going to go and do its linting and its unit testing, and then eventually somebody's going to approve it, and it'll make its way into the product environment. Our proposition is to have a design branch, have the designers like do all of the conceptual work in Figma. They can do your conceptual work on a sketch pad, whatever gets the ideas out, whatever gets the creativity flowing, whatever you do to make it work, then move it into Figma. This is just like a standard, pretty traditional creative workflow here. And then get some product engineers, get some design engineers involved in it to ensure that your token architecture is there, your metadata is there. Leverage a tool like Figma Lint to be able to audit your components to ensure that their layer name is correct, accessibility is there, you've got the correct properties and values and token alignment, and all of that stuff looks good. And then use tools like the Figma MCP or the Figma Console MCP to actually build out into an environment like Storybook. So that way the designer is the one that's actually doing the QA, the visual QA, the interaction QA on those components. Having had worked with many design systems teams, working with product development teams, the QA wasted cycles usually end up being around the minutia. A lot of the micro animations, scroll animations, like when something gets triggered on a scroll depth, animation timing, sequences of animations. The what I was showing today in the accordion example, the 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 easing equation on the pulse effect when you're hovering over an element. Like those are things that traditionally product engineers don't see as well, or most don't see as well as a product designer, because they don't have the design intent. They didn't know
Hmm.
what their vision was. So they would result to specs. And like the specs might be something that's written in a Google Doc, and then they'll try their best to get that working. But it rarely ever
The
does.
Google Doc is outdated.
The Google Doc is outdated. They lost it. It's like I remember where it was this way. It's somewhere in my email, or maybe it's in a Slack message somewhere. So I have no idea where it actually ended up. So I'll just improvise. If a designer can just take on that, and then the code doesn't have to be perfect, but if you're putting the code in a code base that already has pre-reviewed components that have already been abided by organizational best practices and just general, web best practices, accessibility best practices, or Web Vitals, SEO, like whatever the tools you're building. So all of that stuff is built in there. When the design is being codified into its component, but our tool, the Figma Console MCP, has a check where it references other components within that library to ensure that the way that it's being developed abides by the same methods as those coded components. So the fidelity of the component that comes out from a code perspective is almost just immediately passable. So what would happen at the end of that is that since they already have access to something like Claude Code or Cursor, they would use something like the GitHub CLI to say, all right, this passed all my visual and interaction tests, commit and push to the design branch and make a pull request for a context engineer or a developer down the line. So eventually a
Yeah,
developer would get that in their queue. They review it and go, you know what, thumbs up. This looks great. And usually there's like Copilot or some other bot that's gonna review it as well. So even before human eyes get on it, there's a litany of tests that like deploy bot that are going to get to it and then make their suggestions. And then eventually the human in the loop is going to see it. And then that's when it would get merged into the development branch for further development. But I don't know. That's the way I see like the gap closing a little bit more. Like it just seems like that's an obvious area that allows designers to be more effective and actually contribute real things to a production environment, not just instances of things that
yeah,
are referenced by the people who are building the product.
for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great. Thank you for that. My take is that like 100% of product designers should at least try to use AI coding agents and see what's possible and like give some reps, because I think that whether or not it's going to end up in production, it's an incredible tool even for prototyping and just testing things out and seeing what's possible. I've been like probably the last 3 months, like if not more, like very deep, like on a daily basis experimenting, and like I think it's possible to like not touch Figma, but one of the areas that I discovered just recently, I had this like visualization question, kind of like I had to visualize some like reports, and I was like, what's the best way to visualize this data? Like, I mean, this way or that way or that way, and it's almost like I don't have that answer myself, and I'm like, well, actually, that is not a bad use case for Figma, like again, like as a sketch pad, as an exploration. And then this was the area where actually I tested Figma Console MCP. It's like I first extracted all of the components from Codebase into Figma. And then I asked Figma Console MCP to iterate with those components to create a new screen that I didn't yet have in code. It's, yeah, like not perfectly polished, but it actually gave me some solid thoughts of like, oh, yeah, I could actually do it this way. So now from there, I can take it and kind of like bring it back into code. So I think to your point, it's not about the tool. It's like one tool or the other. I think just knowing when to use the right tool, as any, carpenter or woodworker would do, right? Like it's not all
The
about a
analogies are
hammer.
endless. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just about using the hammer all the time. Like you need a chisel sometimes, and sometimes you need that. And sometimes you need this little jig that you only need it for 5 minutes, but without that little jig, like
Yeah.
you would be spending like 3 days.
Master carpenters have the most bizarre, unique tools that do like one specific thing.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like a really critical thing that it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a perfect analogy when it comes to like testing all the tools that are out there and then understanding how they adapt to your workflow. I always talk about tool stacks, and it's like I mentioned Serena and Contact 7 and sequential thinking and all those things. That's like the general overview of a specific use case of when we're trying to do something. But there's so many other sub agents and slash commands and skills and things that we deploy for just unique things that we need assistance on. And you find that when you do what you were just doing. So you found out that you had a couple of iterations that didn't hit the mark the first try. So you could do it and get your reps in and keep trying things, or if you're recognizing a pattern with it, it could be something where something at the root or the foundation of your design system isn't being recognized by the AI for some reason or another. Maybe you had a detached component. Maybe there was something that wasn't named correctly, or maybe there was a misspelling. Layer names go a long way, so that way it knows like if it's an icon and it's not like frame 1 2 3 4, like little things like that. I always talk about this analogy of the check engine light. Like your check engine light in your design system is on, but your car is running. So, but you
Hmm.
don't know if it's your gas cap that might be loose, or you don't know if you're like leaking transmission fluid. But at some point, something might happen, and it could be catastrophic, or it could just be a minor little thing that you patch and then move on. But most design systems check engine light is on, and it's not until you run these tools like Figma Lint, or you allow something like Figma Console MCP to do a like diagnostics of your design system to really allow AI to do its best job, because it runs into things. It'll do a lot of judgment calls, but I don't like to call those judgment calls hallucinations. It's doing its best it can with what it has. I think it's up to us as practitioners to make sure that what we're providing for it is enough of what it needs to be able to carry out whatever the prompt or request is. So in instances like that, I would go two ways. I would either take a deep look at what I'm trying to do and what it's pulling together and why it wasn't able to do what it did. Or it might be an instance where, okay, this is a repeatable thing that I'm trying to do. This might be skill territory. If it's something like I needed to always do this way every time, if it's like highly repeatable, then maybe that's something that you might want to create a skill for. And then I would highly recommend using the skill creator that's built in Claude. It'll just generate the skill for you. Tell it the thing that you want to do, give it the output from what the sequence of events that you just went through,
Hmm.
and then it'll write the skill to tell you how to adjust that so it doesn't happen the next time. Deploy that skill, run it again, and then you'll see that you won't make that same mistake again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's jump into demos.
So if you can see, this window is what you're looking at here. This interface is something that we have called Story UI. For those of you who don't know what Story UI is, Story UI is a node package that has a built-in MCP, Model Context Protocol engine built into it that does an enhanced discovery on the components that exist within a component library with within a Storybook environment. So it works with Storybook to generate components and put them in the Storybook navigation, and it uses an NDX section or NDX page to generate this story panel that has like a chat interface where I can add a new chat. And then there's two models, which is a chat model, which is a pretty standard model. So if I go in here and say like, give me a page filled with various button elements alongside switch elements. So this would be like a command that I'm giving it. We call these like inventory managements. So if you're a product manager or you're a design, if you're a product designer and you want to see what the developers have done with the coded components, the variations, the states, and you want to test them in a coded environment, this would be a good way for you to test it. Another cool thing about it is if you're a developer and you're working in a storybook environment and you're building a button and that button is a button that carries a lot of weight, like you have 147 variations of a button, then creating the stories for each one of those could be a lengthy process. So you might want to just say, hey, create an individual story for each one of these buttons, and then it'll just generate all those things for you. So I just ran that command and then I get this buttons and switches. Let me switch this. And then here is my page of buttons. And then
Hmm.
here is my section of switches.
Awesome. So it's basically like a custom page that you created just for the output of already existing components in that design system, right?
Yes. And like whenever I use Opus or Sonnet, it always likes to go extra. So it'll pair it up. Like if you look at the code that it generates from this, like you could see what it generates, and you can see that it's pulling in another component in there. It's like it knows to pull in a title component with this property. It knows to pull in this component with this property. I didn't ask it to do that, but it took the liberty of creating a composition of like an inventory type report. Like it wanted to give me all of these things. So it's even giving me, so here's it's a group that is putting it in, which is a layout component. And then it's putting it as the button and it's giving me all these different variations of the button. So the variants are filled, light, outline, subtle. So it knows all this stuff already, which is great. Like I love that. So this is on another screen over here. There's what the MCP is returning. Like it for every time I add a component to this, it also has this kind of like live discovery. So a lot of times, what we'll end up doing is we'll do that transition where a product designer will generate code from a design. It'll land in Storybook. They'll do some QA on that design, and then they can use it within Story UI to test it against other components. So if they just created this button component or they just created this toggle component, then they want to say like, all right, well, show them to me with other things. Like I want to see how well it works against button groups. Or I want to see how well it works against within card components, which are things that you could say to it.
What about creating like maybe new UI widgets or things like that?
Yeah, yeah, we could say like I always like card components are my favorite. So we could say like create a event card for a Taylor Swift concert that's almost sold out. So I used one word in there that was specific to like like design systems vernacular. I said card component. Didn't have
Hmm.
to say that. I could have said something like, show me a preview of an upcoming article on a Taylor Swift concert or something. My mind always goes to calling things components, but so you'll get this kind of layout. So almost sold out. It fills it in with an unsplash image, but then it'll give you like, oh, it knows it's the Eras tour. And then it gives you this date. This fell to the next line, which should be up there. And then so that's the almost sold out one. And then here's multiple cards. So it likes to go a little extra. And then so it nails the composition. It puts things in there. I didn't ask for this, but it put it in like an upcoming events section that it might be for like a Ticketmaster or something like that.
That's great. And what if, let's say, if you wanted to update, I don't know, the color of the primary button, would you prompt it or would you go into like tokens and just change it through the style, or what would be the approach?
You can go back in here and reprompt it and say update the color of the button to blue or something like that. But it also generates a story file. So if there was like there's several ways to do this. If you wanted to update it, you could talk through it because it's chat interface. If you wanted to do other things to it, like this is good enough, I want to pass this on to product engineers, they can go ahead and make their edits to it in the code. If you are using this as like a conceptual tool, I just want to create some
Hmm.
concepts here. What I like to do is if you want deep control over it and you're a product designer, but you're comfortable with Cursor, then Cursor has a tool called Visual Editor where you can pull
Yeah.
this into the visual editor. And the visual editor basically gives you a Figma like canvas with editable HTML or editable markup. So you can go into DOM tree and drag things around. It has full awareness of your token values. So you can go in there and say, like, change BG color primary to BG color secondary. And then it'll show you in a drop down where you can select those from. So I thought that part's pretty cool too.
Yeah, the visual inspector is cool. Yeah.
And then I think that this is the voice canvas. Mm, this is in like beta mode, so we'll see how well this works out. But no, I just click here. Let's generate a card component for a home for sale in New Orleans for $36,000. Card component. Sometimes it doesn't pick out. It said car component, but maybe that's just my
Are you using the browser
API.
voice?
Yeah, the first thinking session usually takes the first. Okay, this looks great. I see that we have two buttons. Let's create one button and make that one button say buy now.
And so this story UI, it's integrated with Storybook, right?
Well, I like this. This is great. I see that you have the address that says 1428 Bourbon Street. Let's add like a nice sticker at the top of that, like a nice hot headline that says like French Quarter Realty must have, must go now, or something like that. Yeah, this is a node package that you would install into a Storybook environment. And then so it just listens to me and saves it. And then this would be where I get it. And then that's it.
Nice.
And this is a
Um,
goofy example, obviously, but like this could be, I could say like recreate LinkedIn homepage and then take it from there and move around stuff.
and all of it is using again like tokens from this design system. So like if you go into the token definition of, I don't know, your font or color tokens, you update it in one place and it's going to propagate automatically through everywhere, right?
Exactly. Everything's it's its limits are the design system. But there's also something called story UI considerations that is strictly for the AI generation of it. A lot of design systems don't have layout components. Like some of them don't have grid or split view or anything like that. So some design systems rely on things like Tailwind to create grids with classes. That's something that you might want to tell the story UI considerations markdown file to acknowledge when it's determining how it would like assemble these types of layouts. So like little things like that are important for it to understand because that's good context for it to increase the fidelity or meet the expectations of the output.
I know that many people think of Storybook as a sort of a way to preview components, right? Is that its main benefit or is there more to it? And like, what is the right sort of frame of thinking about how Storybook fits into this whole process? Like how critical of a piece it is and what kind of advantages of using that?
Yeah. So storybook for us is critical. Like so couple it with chromatic and you get the visual regression testing and all of the stuff that comes with that. But whether or not the projects that we work on have storybook integrated in them, we usually do integrate storybook because it allows us, especially because we're an agency, the people who are working within the design systems have a very narrow focus on their portion of the design system, like each discipline, like so like all the people working within that design system. As design systems consultants, we need a very like we need to widen that aperture and we need to see things from like a very holistic macro view. The easiest way for us to do that is to pull in those node packages, those foundational elements, those tokens, those typefaces, those icons, whatever you have as part of your design system, and then get it in one spot. And if we can get it in one spot, then we could do let's just say we're getting it in one spot and then it's just we're viewing one story per component. Now we can use tools like Story UI to say, all right, let's really do some testing on this design system. Let's create some compositions on it. So then we'll be the one saying, show me all the button variations. So then now it'll generate all those and then show me how the slotted elements work in these card component. So then it'll show us how like it slots things in. So it's us really it's easier for us to test the durability of these components and the extensiveness and flexibility of these components by doing it through a tool or an application like Storybook, especially with Story UI attached to it. But even outside of that, Jazz testing is built into it. It has an advanced testing suite in it. It's got accessibility testing. It's got all these community supported add-ons and like a lot of other bells and whistles that some we do use, some we don't use, some we haven't even recognized that we should be using. The Storybook MCP is great. It's
Mhm.
similar to the Story UI piece. I've used the Storybook MCP to do similar things like create really high fidelity stories, and it does a great job. So I see, at least in our line of work, Storybook being a critical part of a design system workflow,
And
especially if
is it
product designers are going to start moving more into the development portion.
Yeah. And is it possible to, let's say, if we take that example again, when there is an existing code base, let's say it was vibe coded, right? Like, let's take an example. It's a new startup. They just vibe coded their product. Now they're getting more serious. Like, now they want to start to tighten things up. They're thinking about consistency, scale. Their team is expanding. Okay. Can you take that code base and sort of prompt your way into Storybook to like have those components kind of automatically defined, or it's not quite magical?
I mean, you can put them in there, but you wouldn't get the biggest benefits out of it. Because I think one of the greatest things about Storybook is just a reflection of your design system. So it's gonna create stories based upon the components that
Mm,
you've installed in it. So if you're creating full layouts, it'll just show you stories as full layouts. So at that point, it's really just like a comp browser, like you're just reviewing comps, but like interactive comps, like you can like click around in them and stuff. But it's not Storybook's not going to decompose your comps into individual components. That's something that would have to happen at the code level, so that way it can pull them in and then extract them as foundational components, as primitive components.
got it. Maybe in closing, South Left, your agency, like you guys have been putting out a lot of tools. Again, Figma Console MCP, huge project, very popular. And I mean, it looks like you're very passionate about open source in general and just like sharing with the public. Like maybe you can share a little bit about like why are you doing that?
Yeah, I am passionate about open source. I am passionate about design systems. So the open source thing first is that we've been in this industry for a long time, and I stand on the shoulders of giants before me who have open sourced things that we benefited from early on. And I'm over 20 years into this industry, and I can't. I know for sure that I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for the open source technology that I had the benefit of using within real projects, all the contributions from all the people who came before me. And sometimes it's hard to take a step back and be aware of how far you've come and that you're actually in a place where you can provide value to people who might be where I was 20 years ago. And that was the way that I kind of put this in perspective. Like, would 20-year ago me benefit from the things that I'm creating right now? And I think that's an important thing to ask yourself if you're a practitioner within the digital field, whether you're designing interfaces or whether you're building technical infrastructure, or whatever it is. I think I get it. Like, revenue is a big thing. Everybody needs to make money off of, to survive. But I also think serving people and being generous with your knowledge is important. And these tools came about kind of organically, where we generated them in house to serve needs for specific projects. And then we found patterns between those projects where we ripped out some of the specificity of those tools to make them more generic to be used across the other projects. And then we thought, wow, if these like 5 projects are all able to benefit from these tools, then why not give this back to the public? So that was, it actually takes more work to make it public ready because then there's a lot of stuff you have to clean up. And then, there's always criticism and feedback that you'll get along the way when you expose yourself like that. But the positive feedback has definitely outweighed the negative feedback by far. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then where I see design systems, so like we're dedicated to design systems, and we've been in design systems for over 15 years now. So like biggest part of my career, and it's mainly because I owe Martha Stewart my time over there because she's a very meticulous designer and she expects things to be done a certain way. And whether it's a digital design system or it's the way she cataloged her magazines on a shelf, everything had its place. And when you translate that to like a digital architecture, and we had a suite of digital projects that we needed to figure out the most modular way to fit these pieces together. And back then it was like Nicole Sullivan who paved the way with object oriented CSS, and like Jonathan Snook with SMAX and scalable modular architecture. So we were applying all of these methods to how we're building these digital properties, ensuring that we get the most reusability out of all of these things. Back then, we'll call them modules, not components. So we would have these pattern libraries that we would use across all these the digital properties, and eventually we would build like ones that we would pass around. It was great. We saw immediate response from new hires, and so that was like the catalyst that led to really having an appreciation for well built component libraries. And then the future prediction, and this isn't like a hard line in the sand. It's just I think this is where like we're starting to just see patterns collect is design systems at some point for product companies feel like they should be table stakes. Like it's the way that we describe or it's the way that we think about responsive web design now. Like it's like when you hire a web development company, it's probably a lower chance these days that they're going to go, we're going to definitely build your website to be mobile first responsive because everybody expects it to already be mobile first responsive. So I think come in a couple of years, whether it's AI generated or human generated or a hybrid of both, I think having well defined, well articulated, consistent, comprehensive design systems is going to be a big part of the future. And I think the means to an end, the products that they're going to be fulfilling aren't just going to be the steady state single page appy type things that we're working with today. I think the next future is going to be more ephemeral UI. It's going to be more the radically adaptive UI. We've been doing a lot of work with actual projects using Google's A2 UI spec, and we've been doing a lot of dabbling with the JSON render. We built a A2 UI bridge to work with React, specifically with the ShadCN library, because we use A2 UI with React. And at the moment, it's only available with Angular and Lit with web components, but it's been a game changer. And the response
Mm.
that we've seen from the organizations that we're working with has been amazing. Like the feedback's been great on this technology. And it's just I see a future where designs only if you have really well built design systems will it be possible to pave the way for that type of future technology.
Yeah, I just recently discovered A2UI. I haven't really played with it. Like, what would be a good place to maybe see some demos of that? Like on their website, there is a little bit, but it's almost a little bit unclear. Like, and maybe is there a way to quickly frame? I know we're on time, but like, what is A2UI for, and like, what
Yeah.
what does it unlock?
So there's a great blog post about it on Google's blog, but a2ui.org is probably the best place where you'll go to get kind of the gist of what it all is. There's an A2UI playground that you can actually play with
Hmm.
predefined compositions like components that are there. And then you can also define your own, so that's a good place just to like interact with it. In a nutshell, what A2UI basically is it's this middle layer between AI talking to components. So it's what let's just call them contracts or it's spec for lack of a better term. So we'll say JSON. So any kind of structured language sits in that layer. What the A2UI does is it generates that layer. So it doesn't speak directly to components to create interfaces. That layer has already been created by practitioners of the design systems that know the type of layouts that should be manifested based on whatever the input is. So the input could be anything. It could be a scroll depth hit. It could be a button press. It could be a chat interface. It could be voice recognition, whatever it is. But the response is uniquely generated for what the intentions are of that user. It could be whatever airlines are available for an upcoming trip to Boston. It could be reservations that are being made for a restaurant that you're looking to go to. It could be movie tickets. A lot of it is input that requires some kind of output, but that output is uniquely tailored to your intention. It's not so. I guess if you put it in perspective of what AI does now, is mostly generative text if you're using a chat interface,
Mm,
or it's generative AI, generative images, or generative code. So the expectations are already there on what you're going to get back. The expectations of what you get back on this is it's unique. It's like you don't know exactly when to get back, but you know what you're going to get back is going to be exactly what you were looking to do to take action on the thing that you were asking it to do, or you were
mhm.
concerned, or you're checking into it. So anyway, I see a lot of potential in that
No, this
world.
is cool. Yeah, I was in one of the apps that I'm building. Like, there is a chat component, and basically, it's like it's supposed to know the knowledge on the particular topic, but also user-aware kind of context. And so, what I've been playing with is like when the user is asking certain things, to instead of just a chat response, to show like a UI card with that particular thing. It sounds like that's A to UI territory, but like maybe it's something to power more of those interactions, taking it beyond just the text to text response and like creating more custom interfaces on the
Exactly.
fly, right?
Yep. That's exactly what it is.
TJ, thank you so much for your time. I know you've been super generous on your time and really enjoyed. I feel like we could talk for another 10 hours. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but also went super deep on some things. So
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a fun talk, and it's a lot of all these topics are things that I'm passionate about talking about. So, but yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to include the links in the description with ways to find you. We'll link out also your latest course, right, with Brett Frost.
AI and design systems.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you and have a great day.
All right, thank you. I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.